Well, welcome everybody. Today I'm going to start what will be a few episodes on the life of Ne Win. A lot is known about Ne Win in terms of when he was in power, but I think very few people know about his early history, and that's something that's always interested me. I'll also direct everyone's attention to a couple of other podcasts I've done on someone who knew him well, which is Kenneth Ba Thaung, who sadly passed away last year in his mid-80s. But Kenneth had many interactions with General Ne Win, and some of those stories I think are classic in terms of showing what Ne Win was like. We're very lucky that the episodes I'm going to do on Ne Win, I'm going to draw heavily on the book on Ne Win, which was written by Professor Robert Taylor, who, as you know, agreed that I could podcast some of the material from his book on Dr. Maung, who, as it happens, was the only official biographer of Ne Win. But let's start at the beginning. The thing that I never really realised, but probably many Burmese do, is that Ne Win was not born Ne Win. He was named Shu Maung at birth and was apparently born on the 24th of May in 1911, which was a Wednesday at Pungdale in Pakung Township. But there seems to be quite a lot of controversy about when he was born, and a lot of that relates back to the different characteristics that Burmese attribute to the day of the week and the time of the day, which is when you are born. So the younger brother of Ne Win, U Tan Nyunt, states that Ne Win was actually born on the 6th of July 1910, which was also a Wednesday just after 6 o'clock in the evening. And U Tan Nyunt's children also concur with that. Now, the significance of the conflicting days of birth may not seem immediately obvious, other than as an indication of the mystery surrounding Ne Win's origins. If he'd been born on a Sunday, his birth name by which he was known until he took his nom de guerre of Ne Win would probably have been Ko Shu Maung, or perhaps Ko Ang or Ko Ai. The significance is that if you're born after 6 in the evening on a Wednesday, your birth sign would be that of a tuskless elephant. Earlier in the day, it would have been of a tusked elephant, Wednesday being divided in order to create 8 birth signs in a week. Persons born in the first half of Wednesday fall under Mercury and are said to be quick-tempered, but as quick to forgive, although they do not forget. They are believed to be brave, optimistic, impulsive, and witty, as well as lucky. Many would say these were the characteristics of General Ne Win. Those born in the second half of Wednesday are protected by the heavenly body of Rahu, which was believed by ancient astrologers to be the planet that causes the eclipse of the moon and the sun. Wednesday afternoon born are described as cautious, highly attached to their families, and tend to be moody. This too could have been a description of Ne Win, some might say. Certainly he displayed a strong sense of family loyalty and responsibility, though not indulgence. Now, let's talk a little bit about his background. So, Shu Maung's father, U Po Kya, had worked as a revenue surveyor in the British Indian government Land Records Department, one of the few parts of the colonial administration composed largely of persons indigenous to Myanmar, as opposed to the norm for the administration, which was largely staffed by British, Indian, and persons of mixed parentage. Professor Taylor says, though poorly paid, revenue surveyors were frequently very knowledgeable in the basis upon which the maintenance of one of the primary sources of government finance, land taxes, depended. Being poorly paid, they were also open to bribery. U Po Ka was thus in a position in which he would have become well informed about local land prices and income prospects. Upon retirement, he acquired sufficient land to live prosperously, growing and selling mixed crops, including groundnuts and corn, as well as rice. He eventually became a broker and trader in many commodities and could afford to build a substantial home, now gone, on the main road in the centre of Pungdale, a relatively prosperous town, unlike some parts of Phea district. Now, Ne Win was definitely not born into a cosmopolitan world, which eventually he was because he travelled greatly and loved spending time outside Burma. But at the time he was born, it was just a rather small township. Ne Win's father was described by his family as friendly and outgoing, while Shu Maung's mother, Do Mi Lai, was typically known for her good business sense. She was from Pakung, the township headquarters of Pungdale, 12 miles away. Ne Win's youngest brother remembers their father as being helpful, restrained and very sensitive to others, although others describe him as a jolly alcoholic. Ne Win's mother, who passed away at the age of 35, was a strict disciplinarian with intense spirit, one not to be caught out by others. After Ne Win's mother passed away, his father took up with a mistress from among the family's servants. Shu Maung recounted in later years that he'd had a happy childhood, though he missed his mother a great deal after her death. Growing up in a very prosperous family in a small town, his early life might best be compared to that of the eldest son of the village squire in the UK, and perhaps assuming the privileges and licenses which went with such a birth position. Unusually for a Myanmar boy growing up in the countryside, he apparently had no appreciable period of time as a novice monk, a normal rite of passage for Theravada Buddhist sons. I guess it shows his parents were not particularly religious. Interestingly, Professor Taylor says there's much speculation that General Ne Win was of Chinese descent. There's no evidence for this, although his mother probably did have a Chinese ancestor, perhaps Ne Win's grandfather. Certainly the Chinese population in Phea district was proportionally small. Ne Win's father was said to have been tattooed from the waist down in a style typical in Myanmar in the 19th century. A picture of him was apparently once published in a Yangon newspaper showing the tattoos. His cousin, a retired village schoolteacher, when interviewed in Pungdale in 2008, insisted that the family was thoroughly Myanmar, and both he and Un Ten Nyunt, the general's youngest brother, have the typically dark brown complexion and demeanour of someone from central Myanmar. Unbelievably, there's some suggestion that Ne Win was descended from a son of King Bo Do Pa, who was in power from 1745 to 1819. He was the sixth king in the Kon Bang dynasty, which was Myanmar's last. There's reportedly a Ne Win family tree showing that this heritage, but I guess there's some considerable doubt about that. By all account, Ne Win's parents made a happy couple until his mother passed away. 2 daughters and 2 sons died early in childhood, but 3 sons survived, with Ne Win being the eldest, followed by La Tun, born in 1917, and Tan Nyunt, born in 1927. In addition to assisting on his father's farm, Shu Maung, or Ne Win, also helped his mother with her first daughter and did a number of domestic chores before going off to school. In 1926, at the age of 16, Ne Win went to Phea and initially enrolled at the National High School. National high schools were established throughout Myanmar following the 1920 student strike at University College and Judson College, protesting government plans to create a new Rangoon University on the elitist model of a British university. Because of this, the school that Ne Win went to, the national school, it was closed shortly after he entered, and he then entered the government Anglo Vernacular High School. Through much of the teaching was in English, and all of the teachers would have been Burmese or Indian. During his school days, Shu Maung, or Ne Win, was said to have disliked bullies. and intervened when he saw younger children being coerced by older ones. Once when he was at home in Pungdale during the school recess, he threw a shoe at some boys from a neighbourhood village who were teasing some of his teammates on a local football team for not wearing their shoes. In later years, as adults, two of the younger fellows, U Tan Daing and U Win Mya, were appointed to the State Trade Council in the 1960s, and another, U Sun Myint, became Burma Socialist Program Party unit chairman in Pan Tong Township. So that shows again how he was loyal to his friends, as I mentioned a little earlier. Persons from his youth and in around PA often played major as well as minor roles in his subsequent career. A key associate in the army until 1963, Brigadier Ang Ji, was from Pungdale, just south of PA, and General Sun Yu, who succeeded Ang Ji as General Ne Win's loyal and long silent deputy, eventually became president of the country. General Ne Win's famous irascibility was marked from a young age. Ne Win grew up very close to his cousin, Ko Nyi, just 4 years older than himself. In PA, they were often together. On one occasion, they went to a favourite stall run by Ma Kin Tong, or Nyinyi, whom he was courting. Something, however, displeased Ne Win, and he left the stall in a fit of pique, being generally rude to all about. When they returned to the market, Ko Nyi accused Ne Win of embarrassing him by acting like a prince sorcerer, a little prince, like a lord who goes to school. Professor Taylor says that Shu Maung just stomped off in a high temper. Subsequently, according to his youngest brother, his mother consulted a fortune teller who predicted that her son, whilst born to greatness, but would never have a satisfactory wife. She attributed his behaviour, including his short temper, to his stars. His mother was said to have made him promise to never physically abuse when dealing with women. General Ne Win's brothers, Professor Taylor says, had very different careers to his own. U La Tun, also known as U Nyi La, was a heavy drinker. He left Burma in 1946 and settled in Indonesia, where he remained until 1948 or possibly 1949. His journey to Indonesia was probably to help his uncle, U Ba Sen, a nationalist politician who was in exile. La Tun married an Indonesian woman who, however, did not return to Burma with him. He made his living by operating a ferry boat, but was in trouble occasionally with the law and went to jail a few times. He was known for his generosity and affability, the latter being a strong family trait. The youngest brother, U Tan Nyunt, had been a businessman like his father, but when the government nationalised most concerns after 1962, he took up a post at the Government Trade Corporation, which dealt with cement, and later worked for the Myanmar Trade Commission in London. Ne Win is said to have done very well at school, both in terms of his academic skills and at various sports. Some claimed he had a photographic memory, and certainly learning seems to have come easily to him. He was articulate both in Burmese and English from a young age, and even tried his hand as a youthful journalist, submitting articles from PA to the Yangon press. His athletic prowess is well known, having been a devotee of tennis into his 50s until he's forced for physical reasons, namely tennis elbow, to abandon the game, and he then became a keen golfer, thus certifying it as a national pastime for the elite in Myanmar. His parents provided generously for his needs whilst away from home, and he would have appeared to many to be the son of a profligate and sympathetic, if not doting, parents. His success at high school was enough to get him into the elite university college and to read for a 2-year intermediate degree in biology, preparatory to enrolling in the highly selective Rangoon University Medical School. It was then the only medical school in Myanmar. Students arriving in Yangon in the 20s and 30s would have found the capital of their country to be almost an alien city. Hindi was more frequently heard than Burmese, in the market as the majority of the population were of South Asian descent. It was a cosmopolitan but highly class and race-conscious city with separate clubs, places of worship and restaurants for the British, South Asian, Chinese and Myanmar populations. Professor Taylor quotes a leading analyst of colonial Burma writing on the cusp of independence as describing the situation as follows. In the strictest sense, a medley, for they mix but do not combine. Each group holds to its own religion, its own culture and language, its own ideas and ways. As individuals they meet, but only in the marketplace, in buying and selling. There is a plural society with different sections of the community living side by side, but separately, within the same political unit. Even in the economic sphere, there's a division of labour along racial lines. Professor Taylor tells us that Shu Maung, or Ne Win, took 3 years to complete his intermediate degree, having failed his examinations in the second year, the first time around. This was attributed to by his brother, not to intellectual incompetence, but to an excess of youthful enthusiasm for entertainment and active nightlife. He used to go to the Rangoon Turf Club to gamble on the horses, which was a major occupation of his university days and afterwards. He did this in the company of 2 other young, prosperous men from his same town. One was the budding film star A1 Tin Maung, who is the youngest brother of the famous early Myanmar cinema director Nyi Poo, appeared in his first film at the age of 10 in 1923. His other mate was Ko Ba Win, the son of a wealthy broker in PA, who was attending Judson College. Having completed the intermediate degree, Ne Win left the university in 1932 at the age of 22 years and sought to occupy himself with other activities, never returning to reside in his village, but visiting frequently in later years. Even though Ne Win at this time was leading a very easy life, he couldn't have been oblivious to the political issues that dominated the Rangoon press and the tea shops. And we'll complete this episode with a discussion of what it was really like in the capital at that time. The actual system was known as a diarchy, a form of mixed government between an elected legislative assembly and the British governor and his civil servants. But it was very much based on race, and many people were not happy with this situation, including a number of Ne Win's distant relatives. In many ways, the Burmese had been made to feel foreigners in their own country. They were ruled by British Indian personnel, both British and South Asian, British Indian law, and exposed to cheap labour as a result of open immigration into Burma, which was relatively more affluent than India proper. The Burmese felt they were doubly colonised, once by the British, who imposed the modern state upon them through the institutions of British India, and secondly by India through large-scale immigration and capital flows. The Burmese felt excluded from the modern institutions of the state and economy that imperialism imported and imposed. The resulting sense of frustration generated a number of complaints centering on the future of the Buddhist faith, the role and nature of educational institutions and their personnel, the exclusion of the Burmese from the civil service and modern sectors of the economy, and the near banishment of the majority linguistic group, the Bama, from the army, in favour of so-called martial races from the non-Bama border areas of the province. This was particularly galling to many young Burmese who were taught not only about Buddhism under the Burmese kings, but also of the proud military history of the pre-modern monarchies, which had lost power and ultimately the independence of the Myanmar state by the inability to modernise fast enough to ward off the colonial onslaught in the 19th century. However, Ne Win really didn't participate in the most radical elements of the Burmese nationalist movements until perhaps 1937-38. Initially on departing his student hostel and taking up residence on 101st Street in Yangon, he attempted to set up a business competing against the Indian charcoal suppliers in the city. Phea, the town from which he originated, was a production centre for charcoal, and Ne Win adduced that he could bring it into Yangon and sell it at a profit. His uncle, Takin Nyi, became the supplier, and he would develop the down-market distribution and sales organisation. The venture promptly failed, allegedly because of the unfair practices of the Indians already in the business, who distorted the market to drive up the wholesale purchase price and undercut the actual cost at the retail end, making the business unprofitable for one with little capital to wait out price distortions. Ne Win apparently learned a lesson that puny measures could not dislodge the massive interests which were so deeply entrenched. This foray into capitalism may indeed have contributed to many of Ne Win's attitudes towards capitalists in the market in subsequent years. Having failed at his first venture, Ne Win fell back on the state for employment. In subsequent years, he often spoke of the dilemma of nationalists forced by circumstances to work for the colonial state. First, in 1934, he worked for the Burma Railways, and then at the Rangoon Post Office. In both these sections of government administration, Anglo-Indians and Anglo-Burmese were employed in the higher technical sections of the operations, grossly out of proportion to their total number in the overall population. The lower skilled were almost entirely persons from the Asian subcontinent. Working in such a non-Myanmar context may well have confirmed Ne Win's perceptions of what, as noted, was the race problem in Burma. During the 30s, Ne Win became more and more involved with the We Burmans Association, which, as I've mentioned earlier, was known as de Burma Azi Ayun. Now, most of the members of the organisation call themselves Takins, and indeed that's the word that one often sees before the names of the people who are members, including Ne Win. And literally, apparently, Takin means master. Professor Robert Taylor makes it pretty clear that that wasn't the only interest of Ne Win. He was also busy having an affair with his landlady. And following his first marriage to Do Tan Nyunt, the first of his children, Cho Tain, was born. According to Professor Taylor, he looked after his son, seeing to his educational and other needs, and never denied that he was the father, and he kept in touch with him for all of his life. In adulthood, apparently, U Cho Tain worked for the government oil and gas company, Myanmar Oil Company, which was monopolised following the complete nationalisation of the Burma Oil Company in 1963. It was around this time that the Burmese political activists saw the Japanese as the way out of the colonial shackles of the British. Of course, they eventually realised that that was not going to happen and changed their direction. But at this time, the 30 comrades, who are famous, of course, in Burmese history, moved to Hainan, and it was there they got training. Now, amongst that group was, of course, Ne Win, who had changed his name for security reasons from Shu Maung to Ne Win. In fact, all of the 30 comrades changed their names for that reason. For example, Aung San changed his name to Bo Tiza. But of course he reverted back to his normal name, whereas Ne Win kept using his nom de guerre from that point on and was known as Ne Win. Professor Taylor tells us that distrust of the Japanese intentions developed in the training camp as the planned date for an uprising in Myanmar was postponed to fit in with the Japanese military plans. Though the 30 comrades had been led to believe that they would operate on their own in organising a revolt in Burma, the longer the delay in invading their country, the deeper their suspicions grew that the Japanese were being duplicitous. Professor Taylor says that Ne Win returned with a distinct resentment of the imposition of Japanese ideals and culture on them. He also said, "We learned our lesson, for the Japanese recruited from both our factions, knowing full well the two of them were far from friendly. So long as we were useful, they were willing to use us. Self-interest was all that mattered." Interestingly, some 45 years after the war, the communist 30 comrade Chaw Zaw, who was at that time a leading figure in the Burmese communist resistance to the government of Burma, claimed that Ne Win and Aung San quarrelled frequently during their training, noting Aung San's alleged puritanical streak and Ne Win's reputation for being a womanizer and a gambler. Chaw Zaw went on to say that all of the 30 comrades agreed with Aung San and despised Ne Win. However, Chaw Zaw didn't have any evidence to back up his claim, and most believe that it's probably not a very accurate description of the relationship between Aung San and Ne Win. The Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor changed everything, and the comrades and their colleagues were asked to organise a Burma Independence Army. Around this time, the 30 comrades, together with their Japanese trainers and officers, took the traditional Burmese blood-drinking oath. I don't think I'll pronounce it properly, but something like Twe Tuak, on the day of the founding of the BIA. This entailed them cutting their arms and draining blood into a silver bowl where it was mixed with that of the others, and then drinking from the bowl after making a pledge of loyalty and comradeship. As I mentioned, the nom de guerre that they all took was indeed to protect their families if they were arrested. And Professor Taylor says that Shu Maung's choice of Ne Win was often translated as brilliant like the sun, or more accurately, someone else says bright sun. At this early stage, the BIA even had in it Japanese officers in leading positions, but eventually they'd be shed from the BIA. But they certainly controlled the organisation in its early days. So, coming to the end of this early stage of Ne Win's life, we find him at the age of 31 about to launch himself on his first military operation. Ne Win was the leader of the only unit of the BIA without a Japanese commander, and he was entrusted with the special task of infiltrating behind enemy lines and creating chaos amongst the British defences, as well as stimulating Burmese support for the incoming Japanese army. I'm not sure whether the Roman Catholic theory of give me a child until he is 7 and I'll give you the man applies to Ne Win, but certainly he was a very intelligent man, and how could he not be affected by all the injustices that he saw existed in Burma under the British rule? Well, I'll close off this episode here, and thank you all very much for listening. And when I record the next episode, we'll deal with the next stage of his life. Thank you again.